Chapter 10, Part 2. The hobgoblins erupted into a cheer that settled into a chant. Hobgob, hobgob, hobbly gobbly hobgob, as hundreds of hobgoblin heads bobbed along with their weapons. I have a feeling the tide has officially turned, Daisy said to Jessie. Jessie frowned. In the hubbub, he had lost sight of St. George. Wait a minute. Then he cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, Where's the Slayer? The hobgoblins stopped chanting and looked around, snuffing and muttering to themselves. I see him! I see him! I see the bad man! Over there! Emmy shouted, bouncing up and down. Daisy caught a glimpse of a red and white underneath the ramp. He's beneath the ramp, she called out. Seize him, shouted the queen. Growling, the hobgoblins rushed at St. George, brandishing their weapons and chanting, Hobgob, hobgob. They swarmed over him, but St. George picked them up and plucked them off like so many burrs. Then he scrambled onto the ramp and ran to the top. There he raised his arms over his head and brought forth more of the same stomach-wrenching light from his fingertips. An avalanche of rocks came crashing down around him, blocking the way out. The hobgoblins howled in outrage. Oh no, we're trapped again, Jessie cried out. Don't fret, lammies, yelled the queen. You can't trap a hobgoblin underground. There are other ways out of here. Follow us. But we can't leave without the book, Jessie yelled. Yet another wave of that foul light flashed. This time rocks showered down and buried the big book in a mountain of rubble. Daisy swallowed her nausea and waved away the dust. Now what? She asked. Hobbies, shouted the queen. Smite the Slayer and make him squeal. The hobgoblins let out a rock-rumbling roar. From where Jessie and Daisy were standing, they had a clear view of the hobgoblins as they rushed up the ramp toward the Slayer, St. George. St. George pulled out a broad sword from his sheath on his hip. Its jeweled hilt sparkled in the torchlight. St. George set to slashing at the hobgoblins as if they were a field of overgrown weeds. Poor hobbies, said Daisy, turning away. Nonsense, boomed her royal lowness. Hobbies love a good clash. Let's leave them to it. You and your draggy wagon come with us. But the book, Jessie and Daisy cried. The book, the book! Is that all you upper realmers care about, some book? Can't you see our stalwart hobbies have their hands full at the present? Queen Hap croaked. It looked indeed as if every last hobgoblin were needed to bring down St. George. But we can't leave it buried here, shouted Daisy. We promised, Jessie said. Leave it you must, bellowed the queen. That was when Emmy stepped forward and said, I think I can, I think I can. Suddenly, Emmy's irises began to spin like a set of brilliant green pinwheels. Her nostrils gave off 3 puffs of peppery pinkish smoke, which rose up and radiated outward, filling the cavern with a bright, hot, pulsing light. The very next instant, the rocks and rubble rose into the air and moved off to the side as if an invisible hand were rearranging them. In a second, the book was completely uncovered. One of the hobgoblins broke from the rear ranks and ran over to the book. He climbed on top of it and dusted it off with Daisy's bandana. I knew I could, Emmy said proudly. Levitating spell. I just deuced it. Aced it, Jessie corrected. Emmy, that was brilliant, said Daisy. Emmy looked modest. I am a very practical dragon sometimes. Climb up on the big book, Jessie and Daisy. We need to get out now. Climb on, please. Welcome aboard, and thank you for flying the big book. You want us to climb on the big book? Jessie shouted. And the book's gonna fly? Emmy nodded vigorously. Quickly now, please, thank you. Her Royal Lowness is waiting. The Queen was tapping her big wedge of a foot impatiently. The hobgoblin with the purple bandana hopped off the book and gestured wildly at the battle. The fray had worked its way down from the ramp and was swarming across the cavern toward them. The hobgoblins knelt before them and made a stirrup of their hands. We have no time to lose, lammies, said the Queen. What about St. George? St. George's sword slashed in all directions, raising sparks as it struck against hobgoblin armor. He seemed to be holding his own as he headed toward them. Don't give it another thought, said the Queen, grinning like a jack-o'-lantern. Our hobbies are just playing with him. Jessie and Daisy let the hobgoblin boost them onto the book. The next instant, the book hovered up in the air. We're floating, said Jessie. Hang on, said Emmy. Follow us, said the Queen, heading for one of the old tunnels. The book moved forward and Jessie and Daisy nearly tumbled off it. Don't worry, said Emmy. I will run behind you and catch you if you fall. The cousins grabbed hold of each other as the book scooted forward. It stopped, then started, then stopped, as if it were testing brakes. Finally, it zipped over the tunnel and dipped slightly like a raft joining a stream. The Queen jogged just ahead. She held her ropes high over her knees, while torches bearing attendant kept pace with her. Emmy brought up the rear, casting an occasional glance over her shoulder toward the cavern. Gradually, the din of battle began to fade behind them, and was replaced by the soft whooshing of the big book as it wove through the tunnels and made up the vast underground maze of the lower realm. At last they came to a dead end, a soft golden blue light from above. Jessie and Daisy looked up and saw a thicket of bushes stirring above them in a gentle breeze. Compared to the inferno they had left behind, the scene above was peaceful and quiet. This way out, said the Queen, with a single upward stab of her hand. Mind the prickers on the berry bushes. Will you be going back? Daisy asked of the Queen. Of course we will, she said. Can't leave all the fun to our hobbies, can we? Watch out for St. George, Jessie said. He's a very dirty fighter. Nobody fights dirtier as a hobgoblin, she said, with a roughish glint in her magnificent mossy green eyes. What will you do with him after you've defeated him? Asked Daisy. Trap him, growled the Queen, like a bug in amber. Will your hobbies be okay? Jessie asked. They will be fine. I'm about to toss in a little shake-up, Queen Hap style, she said with a wink. Goodbye, your Lowness, said Jessie, and thank you for helping us. Thank you for finding our golden pickaxe, she said. Goodbye, Draggy Wagon. Goodbye, keepers. We have no doubt we will be seeing you again in the lower realm someday, when the time is right. Thank you. You're welcome. Come again soon. Don't forget to write, said Emmy. The last glimpse of the lower realm was the Queen's hobgoblin escort waving a wistful farewell with the purple bandana. The next minute the book whisked them out of the hole. Pricker bushes staggered their clothing as they surged upwards into the fresh air. Emmy climbed out after them, stopping to grab a handful of berries to cram into her bright pink mouth. Above ground, darkness had begun to fall. The deep woods throbbed with reassuringly friendly sound of peepers. Jessie looked at his watch. It was 8:20 in the evening. Time sure does fly in the lower realm, he said. Books fly too, said Daisy. not being able to resist a good joke. Reluctantly tearing herself from the fat, ripe raspberries, Emmy ran to catch up with the book as it bore the cousins through the deep woods. The trees leaned to either side to make way for them, and it wasn't long before they broke out of the woods into the pasture. "I think I'm going to call it the Hobhorn Farm from now on," said Daisy, with a backward glance at the mountain previously known as Old Mother. The waterfall was swollen from recent rains, and it gushed down the rock face like a molten silver beneath the moon. "And she's crying buckets just like a real live hobgoblin, only a little less muddy." But Jesse wasn't looking at the hobhorn. He was looking at the pasture before them. "Wow," he said. "Daisy, look." Daisy turned to see. "Holy moly," she said. Stretched across the pasture, from the barn to the brook, from the deep woods to the laurel bushes, was a vast circle of translucent dryads of all shapes and sizes. Their long arms were intertwined as they moved together across the clover in a slow, rhythmic dance. "There must be hundreds of them," Jessie exclaimed. "Thousands," said Daisy. "It's the great dance of the dryads," said Emmy in a hushed voice. The two figures broke away from the dance and approached them. "Well done, Emerald, and well done, Dragon Keeper," said Douglas Fir. "We are dancing to celebrate our liberation from St. George," said Lady Aspen. The third figure came up behind them. He was thin and wrinkly, with a head of long, straggly green hair, and huge green bags slung beneath them. Jessie and Daisy would have known the dryad anywhere. "I think someone wants to thank you," Douglas Fir said, stepping aside. "Willow?" "Thank them?" said the willow. "I want to fall to the earth and kiss their feet. I'm so happy of my recent free unpleasantness. You have no idea. I'm so happy I could cry." "Please don't," said Daisy through a fixed smile. "We're glad we could help," said Jessie, although he wasn't sure how much help they had actually been. "Really, it was the hobgoblins." He stopped and clutched Daisy's arm. A faint rumbling noise sounded from somewhere nearby underneath the earth. "What's that?" he asked uneasily. The dryads stopped dancing and cocked their leafy heads, listening. "That would be her royal lowness," said Douglas Fir. "She's giving the earth a little shake-up, Queen Hap style." "You mean an earthquake?" Daisy said. Douglas Fir nodded. "A small one, very concentrated." "Don't worry," said Aspen. "It's a very, very good sign." "St. George has been defeated," Douglas Fir stated. "I hope so," said Jessie. The next minute the earth stopped rumbling, and the dryads started to dance again. "Can you stay and join the dance?" asked the willow. "I promise I'll stay as dryad as a Texas cottonwood in a drought." "You'll be our very special guest," said Douglas Fir. "We would be honored to have you in our midst," said Lady Aspen. "Thanks," said Daisy, "but we can't tonight. I promised my mother we'd be to bed early, and it's been a long couple days." "And nights," said Emmy. "But we can't go home yet," said Jessie. "First, we have to drop off the book at Miss Elodie's house." "I have a feeling she'll be waiting for us," said Daisy. "Well, if you're leaving the dell with that thing," said Douglas Fir, "you'll be needing some of these." He held out a fistful of ferns. That's the end of chapter 10. Chapter 11 is called The Perfect Coffee Table Book.